Hi, my name is James. Thanks for checking out my video I have on my project. So I'm going to go over a little bit of what I decided to explore and how I decided to do it. We can start with my focus question, which is what methods do teachers find most effective for staying proficient in evolving teaching methods and technology in the classroom? So, in order to accomplish the exploration of this question, I devised a brief survey with 7 questions. The first question is, how long have you been teaching? And the teachers had 4 options, 0 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years, and 21 plus years. The second question, what grades have you taught? Third question, how many years have you taught your current grade level, which they would write in. The fourth question I had them answer is, what is your preferred method for keeping up with modern teaching trends, strategies, lesson planning, and/or technology? They had 5 answers to choose from. A is internet, B is literature, C are team meetings, D are conferences, and E is other for them to write in. For question 5, I had the teachers rate their proficiency in modern current teaching trends and technology on a scale from 1 through 10, and they could just circle one of the numerical choices from 1 through 10. For number 6, in your opinion, what is the most significant technological change with regard to education in the last 20 years? And they could write that in. And finally, number 7, in your opinion, what is the most significant pedagogical change in education in the last 20 years? For this answer, they had the only option of writing in an answer, not choosing one. For the survey, initially, I was only going to put out hard copies of paper with pencils, but I decided that utilizing the option of answering on an iPad would offer more insight into their choices. Giving the option of filling out this survey via iPad or paper and pencil was almost like asking a question without actually asking it. What I mean when I say this is that whether or not a teacher chose to submit this survey electronically or pencil and paper is actually relevant to the study itself. As we'll find out when I explore the graphs that I created using the data from the surveys, we will see the insight that this first choice brought us. For this first graph, we have 11 different years that each of our 26 participants have been teaching for. This is significant because it gives us a spread of years that each of them have been in the education profession. This may or may not correspond to the spread of data that we collect based off of other factors aside from the amount of time that they've been teaching. In our next graph here, we have a breakdown of 4 categories for our 26 teachers. These are years taught, or years having been a teacher. We have 0 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years being the largest grouping, and 21 plus years being the smallest group. So, in the graphs that I've compiled, which we'll see in a few minutes, we can see that the 0 to 10 year category really has their clear preferences for certain teaching methods and professional development methods. So we'll see that a little bit more later on. So here we have a breakdown of our 26 participants that indicates the grade levels that they went to school for or teach. So we have 44.4% approximately being certified to teach or having taught kindergarten through 8th grade. We have 37.4% of our participants are K-6, and the remainder are K-12. This could be because a more common certification years ago was K-8. Now it's, I believe, more commonly K-6. But some teachers, as we can see here, are certified to teach K through 12. It could also be understood that this means they have only had experience teaching these respective grade levels. So this graph is the first real compiling of my data that offers us some clear delineation and preferences. So we can see that the group of 0 to 5 year teachers, teachers who have been teaching from anywhere from first year to 5 years, had a clear preference at 83% of that group and choosing to answer my survey on the iPad. After that, it quickly dips down. 6 to 10 year teachers chose iPad submissions at 62.5%, whereas teachers who have been educating for 11 to 20 years preferred the iPad at 45.5%, and we had the one outlier, a teacher who had been teaching for more than 21 years, skewed his group at 100%, choosing to submit on the iPad. So this clear preference carries on into other data compilations I do with graphs, which we'll see in a few minutes. But the clear preference here seems to be that younger educators tend to prefer professional development that is very self-motivated. It seems like they would rather seek out their professional development as opposed to being spoon-fed certain types of professional development. By and large, I see a preference for things that are online, things that are computer-oriented, things like that, which once again we'll see in other graphs as I put them up and talk about them. So here we have our next graph where we have a breakdown of preferences for professional development. When I indicated an online preference or an online option on the sheet, it's understood to be self-guided, so anything that includes looking for teaching ideas online, communicating with other teachers online, things of that nature. So it really is more of a self-guided option, I should note that. So we have 35.7% choosing online as their preferred method of professional development. Then we have 28% opting for conferences or being partial to those. 21% chose teacher workshops as a preferred method, and the smallest number chose team meetings as their preferred method of professional development. My takeaway here was that the online preference was the largest portion or preference of this pie chart taken up. So I view this as a clear indication that one subgroup of teachers definitely prefers self-guided professional development and definitely skews more modern, more electronic, more technology. So this graph here is one of my more interesting findings. So I decided to isolate teachers who have been educating for 11 years or longer and see what their preferred method of professional development is amongst the choices. So we can see here that at 41.6% and another 41.6%, workshops and conferences drastically take over the pie chart, as opposed to online being a more significant portion when we compiled the preferred professional development of all the teaching groups. So anyone from first year all the way up to 21 plus. Online definitely skewed more. Whereas when we isolate the groups of teachers who have been teaching for 11 years or longer, the online portion becomes drastically more minimal. This definitely continues with the theme of younger teachers being more comfortable and or preferring technology. So this then begs the question, are younger teachers more comfortable with technology? Do they prefer technology? Do more experienced teachers have a disdain for technology? Do they prefer more basic methods of education? So while this data does tell us something, it also raises more questions. So here we can see I decided to take my data and see if there were any differences or clear preferences relative to number of years spent teaching and the preference for differentiation or inclusion as the most significant change to teaching pedagogy in a teacher's lifetime. So we can see that once again the groups sort of split themselves up. The first to 11-year teachers tend to have a preference for choosing differentiation as the most significant change in education pedagogy, whereas teachers who have been teaching for 11 years or longer tend to see inclusion as the most significant change. Really, there's no right or wrong answer here, but something with regards to the amount of time spent in education is shifting the data to be partial one way or the other. So we can see from the yellow squares that we have teachers who have been teaching for 17, 19, 16, 15, 14 years, and over on the left side we tend to have teachers once again from that first year to 11 year. There are always some outliers. As we can see, some of the yellow squares have moved left, but those yellow squares tend to be right on the cusp. So we have a 13, 11, and 14 year. One can only surmise as to why these two groups differ in opinion on so many issues explored in this survey. In this instance, it could be that more senior teachers have seen greater change with regard to inclusion, whereas younger teachers have been stressed differentiation in their college education as well as in their teaching careers, that they see this as the most significant change in education. There really is no right or wrong answer with regards to this, but we can only observe the clear preference for each group. For this next graph, I sort of did the same thing, except I tried to see if there were any differences in number of years teaching relative to what teachers thought the most significant technological change in education was. I didn't give them only the choice of a smartboard or computer. It just so happens that all of them chose one or the other. So we can see here that initially it looks like it's a little bit less delineated than the previous graph. But what's interesting to note is whereas there were less purple 6 to 10 year teachers that were on the right with the previous graph, the only 6 to 10 year teachers that moved to the right side on this graph were more senior 6 to 10 year teachers. So any educators that were teaching for 8 years and above tended to see the computer as the most significant technological change in education, whereas the less senior educators in the 6 to 10 group, the 8, the 7, and the 6, stayed on the left, choosing the smartboard as the most significant change. We can see something similar happening with the 11 to 20-year teachers, that more of the senior portion of the 11 to 20-year teachers, the 17, 19, and 15, stayed on the right side, choosing the computer as the most significant technological change, whereas the younger portion of that group tended to stay left. So I would say that this delineation isn't quite as clear as the previous graph, but there is definitely a delineation between the two groups here. Overall, when we look at something like this, this can indicate once again educators' preferences based on the periods of time they've experienced in education. I would, off the top of my head, guess that witnessing the computer as a very significant change in education was something that happened greater than 15 years ago, where the computer really became a mainstay in the school building and in the classrooms, whereas the smartboard is a more significant change that has taken place over the last 10 years. Once again, these 15-year and 10-year markers are not set in stone. There can always be outliers. So we should examine my focus question, which is what methods do teachers find most effective for staying on top of evolving teaching methods and technology in the classroom. The results of the surveys that I had people participate in clearly show that there are differing preferences amongst teachers that have been teaching from 1 to 10 years versus teachers that have been teaching for 11 or more years. We can see from some of the graphs that teachers who have been teaching for 11 or more years tend to prefer face-to-face, person-to-person interaction, whereas teachers who have been educating from 1 to 10 years are definitely partial to things such as smartboards and technology. This is not to say that there aren't outliers and that teachers who have been teaching for 1 to 10 years can't prefer face-to-face interaction. There will always be outliers, as the graphs also indicated. Do we just relegate more senior teachers to greater face-to-face interaction? Do we give choices to teachers as to what professional development they seek out? Or do we just relegate younger teachers to using more technology-based methods of professional development and gaining experience in newer technologies? There's no clear answer, but the idea that we should offer both to teachers is probably the safest bet. Anything in moderation and any middle ground we can reach with regards to teacher preferences for professional development and staying abreast of technology is probably best.